Hey everyone, thanks for your time. Happy Sunday, Happy New Year's. Well, here we are. We're possibly about a month away from the Artemis II launch, or at least the earliest opportunity for that. And I thought just to set the table, so to speak, going to questions. Um, So this last week was the second and last week of the sort of year-end fortnight holiday. There was very little the week before because the countdown demonstration test was conducted on December 20th and a Saturday and everything. So NASA did post some imagery, mostly stills, but a little bit of edited video. So we did get a little bit of news the week before, but then this past week, the only thing we got, which was still good, was that right at the end of the week, NASA press secretary Bethany Stevens posted, just the overall saying that rollout was in less than 2 weeks, and they didn't. They don't sound like they're ready to commit to the February launch period, which is launch period 17. But it's a good sign because it means that they have not ruled out, certainly have not ruled out a February launch period. And then she also did mention that February 6th apparently is the earliest date that they would be looking to launch. But of course, all of this is subject to change. And so what we'd be looking at here, let me go ahead and sort of bring up the calendar, so to speak. So she did not give us a rollout time, hopefully beginning tomorrow. Tomorrow, everybody in, air quotes, everybody's back from work. Hopefully we will get some more information about timings for the rollout. When are they going to roll out? And then there are some big milestones in that sort of 2.5 to 3 weeks of work after they get to the pad. But this is kind of where these are the sort of the ranges. Again, I'm trying to make an educated guess. Whether that's educated or not is to be determined. But they're looking to roll out basically sometime in the next, she said on Friday the 2nd, in the less than 2 weeks away. So in theory, that would be, maybe middle of next week. But it could be, we don't know for sure because they haven't made a distinction between being ready to roll out and then actually doing that. And there are all of these parameters and constraints in terms of flight termination system, how long that's good to be used once it's activated. They haven't done that yet. We're waiting for all of these final steps, final pre-rollout steps. And then launch period 17 begins somewhere in, this outline that I've drawn out, but we don't know. We're waiting for that. We're waiting for some information on that. And so the other couple of things I can mention here, in terms of what I'm looking for in the next, couple of weeks, hopefully before the rollout, but maybe not. But we're looking obviously for a schedule. The other big milestone will be the flight readiness review. That's where they would officially sanction the launch date. Hopefully we would get something before that. If you remember back to Artemis I, the first opportunity was at the end of August, and we kind of had that. There was an August 29th date that was out there in the public, and then they basically blessed that, so to speak, at the flight readiness review. That was a week before that launch attempt. So we're looking for dates for that. What's the schedule for the rollout? What's the schedule for the wet dress rehearsal tanking test, and so on. And then also, these publications are things that will be very useful for us in terms of understanding the crew timeline during the mission and just more information. The availability calendar is just these launch periods. What are the dates that they can launch? And we would be interested, obviously, in February. And then March, obviously, if they can't make it to, they can't make February, and then the next ones after that. The mission timeline would be, like I was saying, sort of the crew timeline, the overall mission timeline. What's the crew during during their work day, which is going to be 2 shifts and then 1 shift for sleep. And then there will be sometimes other activities that go on while the crew's asleep or officially asleep. And then obviously the other thing would be the media kit and hopefully some other information. But anyway, that's kind of where things are right now. We're sort of waiting for how much work do you have left? Are you still on schedule to roll out maybe middle of next week, maybe end of next week? And what's the date? And then obviously what are the launch, what's the first launch date? And then how much time do you have in February to launch, assuming that they can still go to that. So, yeah. Okay. And I see a couple of familiar names in there giving some giving some information. Anthony saying rollout's going to be somewhere in this, not this coming week, but the week after that. Hopefully we will get something tomorrow. But let's see. So, let's see. So, okay. Let's see. First question. Well, okay. So somebody asked, why were the paint jobs on the SRBs for SLS changed? They rotated I think they rotated the worm logos in the middle of the solid rocket boosters. They rotated those towards the plus Z side of the vehicle, which is, let me see if I can bring that up. I gotta pull up that folder. Okay, let's do the context first, and then we'll come back to the see if I can find it. There's a lot of graphics. Okay. Let's see if I can bring this up. Right. So the plus Z side. So when the vehicle's on the pad, we were looking at that the thumbnail for this live stream with the vehicle and the lights. This is the plus. This is the side that you see from the point of view of the camera with the launch umbilical tower behind it. So this is the plus Z side. Oh, that's not going to work in this one here. You can see it labeled, but I'll go ahead and circle it anyway. And then the minus Z side, that's the side that's facing the tower. So when we see replays of the launch, or if you go back and look at the Artemis I launch, you'll see this side of the vehicle. It has more equipment sort of on the exterior of the vehicle. You can see the core stage systems tunnel, but all the photogrammetry markings are on this side. And I think they may have rotated the logos. There's a couple of reasons that I can think of. One of them would be to make those easier for the cameras, which are all, which I believe they're not all on the plus Z side, but it gives the it gives the photogrammetry analysis additional markings to look at. But then the other thing is that let's see if I can find a picture of that. By rotating them, let me go ahead and. Thanks for bearing with me. This will be a little. I'll go ahead and put this up for the moment. The calendar and I can the drawing or the this is the configuration that they're going to. This is the configuration now for the in graphic form, and so one of the things This doesn't have the America 250 logos on them, of course. Let me see if I can bring up that too. But the short story, which is not my strong suit, is by rotating them this much towards the plus Z side, they could finish painting them before they closed the vehicle out and closed out the systems tunnels for the solid rocket boosters. And I'm going to see if I can find a picture of that on the Artemis I vehicle pre-launch, because what they had to do was, yeah, here we go. This is at least something. It might be a little. Well, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. But you can see when they were facing directly out, you can see that part of the worm logo has to be painted on the cover plates for both systems tunnels, and so you have this is the operational instrumentation systems tunnel, and you can see again, from a distance it's hard to tell that there's anything there, but then so there's that, and then this ribbon looking thing is more of I believe is development flight instrumentation, and I don't know if that's going to fly, how much longer that's going to fly on the vehicle, but it's obviously flying. It's flying on the first two for sure. These were the Artemis was the uncrewed demo for Orion and SLS, and Artemis II is the crewed demo. So these at the very least have always been sort of on the books as these tests. So by rotating them over to this over here, they were able to paint them completely on the cases, and they don't have to do any of this paint detailing. They were similar to the America 250 logo. They could paint those without getting in the way of closing the vehicle out for rollout and launch. So well, that's some rollout footage. So that's kind of why, those are some of the reasons why why they would do that. So the launch window, the next question I see on here, why is the launch window so long? It's only, even for Artemis I, Artemis I had longer windows, longer opportunities. Artemis II has an additional constraint due to the Orion heat shield. Because of there's a re-entry constraint that is Artemis II only, which reduces the launch windows, the launch periods. And I know that somebody was mentioning about taxonomy terminology. Launch period would be this whole, however many days there were in February that they could launch. And then a launch window might be on, for example, on February 6th, it might be, we know that it's going to be late evening local time in Florida. So the launch window would be whatever 2 hours is the maximum number, is the longest launch window they can have on a particular day. And so for these missions with Orion and SLS that are going to the moon, they have perhaps up to 2 weeks. For Artemis I and just sort of in general, without any other constraints on it, you have a approximately repeating period of 2 weeks of opportunities, followed by 2 weeks of no opportunities. And that has to do with the SLS, this particular interim version of SLS, the Block 1 version with the United Launch Alliance interim cryogenic propulsion stage, upper stage, or in space second stage to be more specific. But that's, so they only have about a week for Artemis II because of this additional constraint. It basically further reduces the opportunities that they have. So they'll have about a week in early February. There's, I think, then, because February is only 28 days, and the lunar month is only 28 days, the March, the opportunity the next opportunity would be about the same point relative to the month in March, but then the opportunity after that, which would be 18 or 19, I'm sorry. So this would be launch period 17. Launch period 18 would be early March. Launch period 19 would be is probably going to be mostly April, but there perhaps might be there might be an opportunity at the very end of March. And then as you drift further into the year, because you have the difference between the lunar month and the calendar months, these periods will sort of kind of drift across the calendar slowly across the year. So, but obviously NASA is hoping that they're going to be able to be ready to launch in a month, and that they launch in one of these opportunities that they get here in the next 4 weeks. So, and so in theory, they have, somebody's talking about the booster stack life. That is, that's also situational. The boosters are generically rated without taking additional measurements or really doing anything. They talked about, we talked about that more for the first one because it seemed like it was a bigger constraint. So there's a generic 12-month stack life, but that can then be extended. And obviously we're I think right now, almost to the day, was when they started. The stack life clocks start as soon as you mate. You do the first segment to segment mate on each booster, and that was like almost to the day this time in 2025. And they're not going to obviously launch until after that, but they have more time, and I think they said that they could go well into 2026. And again, obviously they don't want to do that if they don't have to. So let's see. No. So somebody's asking about the hydraulics that the solid rocket boosters use for thrust vector control. So the solid rocket boosters provide the majority of not just the majority of the thrust. It's almost, I think it's either 75 to 80% of the liftoff and climb out thrust for the vehicle. And so those are the levers you want to use to steer the vehicle. It's the same. I think it's the same basic idea as the shuttle orbiter used the same type of a system. And so I'm not. They basically burn hydrazine to create hydraulic pressure. So that's, I mean, again, that's a basic, that would be a good one where that would be something to look up the textbook definition, or again, it is space shuttle hardware. And so that might be a good one to look up in the space shuttle, in a space shuttle reference. But they have each booster has two systems, two hydraulic systems, A and B. Each one has a dedicated dedicated hydraulic power units and hydraulic systems, and obviously a hydrazine tank for that. When they moved, the core stage did not take that with them from the orbiter. They're using modified they call them auxiliary power units on the core stage in the shuttle orbiter. They modified those power units to use a helium spin start system on the ground, and those start at T-minus 4 minutes, and then they then use hydrogen, sort of hydrogen outflow from the engines. Once the engines start and come up to main stage, the ground helium system is bypassed by the pressure from the engines running in main stage, and then system runs like that. Those hydraulic systems run there. So the advantage is there's no toxic loading that needs to be done on those systems for the core stage, and then for the solid rocket boosters, if they do get to the next generation solid rocket boosters, they're going to replace the hydrazine powered hydraulics with an electric thrust vector control system. So, but again, and they tested that on that first development motor that was run during the summer. The issue that they had, I don't believe, had anything to do with the electric thrust vector control. And in fact, they did an engineering test with these shuttle era 5-segment solid rocket motors, where they cut over the electric thrust vector control system as a development test. And that test, which was done, I think, back in 2022, they did not have the issues that they saw, which, with the nozzle on the Bole, the development motor test here back in late June, I believe it was. Weather risk, let's see. We don't know this. This is obviously one of the other questions that is what time of the day will they do the rollout? I think sort of a de facto, but not always the case in shuttle, and they've sort of carried that forward, was they like to call it triple balls 1, which is basically midnight. They would set up for first motion at midnight. Since climate, from just a general weather standpoint, you would expect the weather to be the most placid, the most calm at that time of day, but that isn't necessarily a guarantee, especially in the winter months like this. If you have a cold front coming through or something like that, you could have weather any time of the day. But in the summertime, as an example, you tend to have afternoon thunder showers, and once the sun goes down, then the heating, the convection from the heating goes away, and things tend to settle down in that period. So that's if it was. I'll have to go look up the weather rules for rollout, but if it was raining hard, there are definitely wind constraints. And probably they had some issues with some shuttle rollouts where if it was just raining so hard that the crawlerway got muddy, or then that would be another constraint. And then there would also be constraints for things like lightning. So high winds would be a showstopper. Lightning would probably be a showstopper. And so that's going to be something that will be keeping an eye on. But right now, I don't know that they certainly haven't said, they haven't set a day yet, or at least not publicly. And then obviously they have not announced a time that they're targeting for first motion at this point. So we'll have to see what other, if there are any special weather constraints. But that would be the difference between your typical summertime weather pattern. There is you would just expect them to try to roll out at midnight or thereabouts, at least target that. Now, it's harder to tell, and it may not be. If they get delayed for whatever reason, if the weather's okay, they may choose to not just delay 24 hours, but that there's all sorts of other factors. Another example would be the crew, that the crawler crew, if it's just a single crawler crew, well, then they have, there's only so much time that they can be on shift. So, you get to a point where if that's the case, where they would just say, okay, we'll just push it 24 hours. So, that will definitely be something we'll be watching when we get right down to the hours and the hours before they're scheduled to roll out. All right. I mean, okay. So Anthony's asking. I think, and I guess I would call Anthony an insider. But anyway, he's asking, what do I think is going to happen after two flies? I mean, so he's asking, when do you if we make a couple of optimistic assumptions. So first would be that the all of the changes that they've made to harden the mobile launcher from launch effects, that those all go relatively well, and they can, the mobile launcher is, that will be another one of those questions. How long is it going to take in an optimistic case? How long would it take to refurbish the mobile launcher and for it to be ready to support stacking the next vehicle? But the question being, when would we think to see that? That would obviously be one of those signs about what NASA is thinking about doing. Let me see if I can bring up. Well, but the boosters for Artemis III or whatever they're going, we don't even. This is the thing about. Things are so cloudy after Artemis II again. You have the nominal schedule. Artemis III is the first lunar landing. Artemis IV is the second lunar landing and is the first Gateway assembly mission. But what if they decided to do something else? Would you just would you retain the Artemis III designation for that lunar landing mission with the Block 1 vehicle, especially if you use up the last Block 1 vehicle for something else? So anyway, the motor assemblies, which are the 10 loaded segments, are still in Utah. I believe the nozzle extensions / exit cones are also in Utah. The other hardware is in the booster fabrication facility, so that's sort of on site at Kennedy Space Center. But even if they had another mobile launcher, they don't have the booster hardware ready yet. And obviously, the big question for that next set, what we'll just call it Artemis III for now, the Artemis III hardware, all of the SLS hardware is basically done, with the big exception being the core stage. And so that's another one of those questions. We don't know. We have a much foggier idea, if that's the best way to put it, or a less clear idea about when the core stage 3 is going to be, or when they expect it to be completed. I do think it's still expected to be this year now that we're in 2026, but it could be all the way at the end of the year. And so, there is some work that needs to be done, especially on the aft segments of the boosters, that has to happen in Florida. And so that's going to be one of those questions, because if they're not, let me see if I can find that graphic now, because it becomes kind of where would you put, is it even possible to fly another mission? Yeah, here we go. So, I'm cutting it off a little bit, but you can kind of see on the calendar on this, looking at the big picture here. So if I changed this a little bit, because the official dates for Artemis II still is officially, air quotes, no later than April, which is again, it's a sort of legalese commitment date because Orion has hit that point in its program life cycle. But let's if we say that Artemis II, let's say Artemis II flies in February, and let's say Artemis IV officially still is September 2028, but let's say it's the very end of 2028, which is the lunar landing goal. That's I'm saying Artemis IV. So then the question is, can you fly can you fly another vehicle in between those two? Because if you can't, then, again, can't being in air quotes, but let's just, again, to simplify things, if you can't do it, then you have to hold that vehicle to be ready to do a lunar landing. Now, then you bring in all of the other fun stuff where it's like, again, there are lots of people and we don't have any information. We don't have, I'd say, the level of information to make a judgment call on, is the end of 2028 realistic for either Starship or whatever this blue moon alternative option is. But if we assume at this point, early 2026, that they're going to hold NASA, they're going to try, and NASA is going to, the administration is going to hold NASA to the date, and NASA is going to try and hold all of the contractors for Artemis III for sure, and maybe even Artemis IV to the dates that they currently have, then this is how much time you have. And so if if we look at I just picked 18 months. So if you go backwards from December 2028, 18 months, that takes you back to middle of 2027. And the reason I didn't pick 18 months for any particular reason, because there's there's some conjecture that it will take longer than 18 months to do all of the verification and validation for the mobile launcher, and then for the Block 1B vehicle for Artemis IV. So, so would you need more time than that? Now, having said that, NASA was planning Artemis III mid-2027, and they were planning Artemis IV September 2028. So they're thinking, obviously, they think they could do some of the mobile launcher verification and validation out at Pad 39B, while Artemis III is getting ready. But that's still not very much time. And then 18 months, there's still, as I've mentioned several times, there's no crew named for Artemis III. So even if Artemis III was just going to be, even if you were going to repeat Artemis, well, that's not good. If you were going to repeat Artemis II, you might choose to use the Artemis II crew again. But setting that aside, if you were going to fly something else besides that, an Artemis mission, and you were going to use 18 months as the absolute minimum amount of time between the mission flying, hopefully now-ish, and the next one, just so that they can train, and it isn't just the flight crew, it's the flight control teams, the launch control teams, then you're looking at, you're already looking at sort of an August 2027 timeframe as the earliest possible time you could fly the next mission. But you can see there's already kind of we're already squeezed here between the two, between these two constraints, these two hypothetical constraints, because I imagine NASA would say, well, we think we could fly Artemis IV sooner than 18 months after Artemis III. And I think I can't remember, they've set different times, dates in the past, or periods of time in the past between those two. But this is kind of the question, which is what's going to happen after Artemis II. And of course, I think I mentioned it in the last video that I did, that if I had to guess right now, I would be just thinking, I don't expect them to commit we will see, because we just, obviously Jared Isaacman just became NASA administrator in, the last handful of weeks. So maybe he's already decided to take that they want to accept a little bit more programmatic risk and do things a little bit differently, and that maybe that 18 months doesn't matter as much as, how, instead of saying it's a minimum 18 months without any without challenging any assumptions, maybe there's a shorter period of time. But my guess is they aren't going to change anything until after they see what happens with Artemis II. And that's why I've said it isn't just Artemis II. It wouldn't just be Artemis II being a safe and successful mission. That's a not necessarily a minimum, but that's obviously a key. But it's also how clean Artemis II is. So Artemis I was a safe and successful mission. They talked about the Orion heat shield issue, and how if there had been a crew on board, they would have returned safely, but you still had that issue to deal with. So that would have taken a while to do the root cause corrective actions on something like that. If you were to have something like that come out of Artemis II, then you might not be ready to fly in the bare minimum of time between Artemis II and Artemis III. So that's why, we'll just have to see. But if I had to guess, they're going to wait and see, and I don't know how long after the mission, but that they're going to kind of take a wait and see approach, since in theory, if they were to launch early February, that means, inside of 60 days, they should at least have kind of a sort of gross course idea of how much work there is, how many in-flight anomalies they had on Artemis II, and how much work it's going to take to turn around the exploration ground systems, Orion and SLS programs, just purely from a post-flight analysis standpoint, how much time it's going to take them to turn around and be ready to fly from just a program standpoint. And then maybe they start to say, okay, here's how quickly we could fly again. But then that's why I say there are all these questions about if the lunar landing is the top priority, and of course it sounds like that, then you could, I think I could make the argument, if the lunar landing is the top priority, and again, the rhetoric makes it sound like that for sure, then you just wait. Do you take the chance? Because if you fly that, I can understand the being an aggressive posture. That would be more aggressive, is to say, hey, we're going to keep flying. We're going to fly that last Block 1 vehicle, and we'll have the Artemis IV hardware ready before the end of 2028. But then you're taking the risk that you fly Artemis III, and then that Artemis IV vehicle, the Artemis IV SLS and Orion, are not ready to launch by the end of 2028. But then again, so it's like these are these big picture questions, which is, what do you want to do after Artemis II, and when, and then how realistic is end of 2028 for the human landing system providers? Because this is one of the reasons why things are inherently political, which is, I'm very skeptical if they knew today, and some people would say they already know, but some people are very pessimistic about the ability for the for Starship and Blue Moon to be ready. I don't think there's enough information in public to know. But if they knew that they weren't going to be able to fly a lunar landing mission by the end of 2028, then pragmatically you could just say, well, let's just go ahead and keep flying. And you might even say, well, if we don't have a lunar lander by the end of 2028 and we're ready to fly another mission, like for instance, do the Gateway Assembly mission, assuming that hardware is ready, that's not a given either, then you just keep flying until you have a lunar lander. And when you have a lunar lander, you fly. But I don't expect anybody to come out and say, Transportation Secretary Duffy, he could politically say we're not going to be ready mid 2027, because he didn't really say that. He just said Starship's going to be 2028 or late 2028. It's going to get harder and harder politically for them to say we can't do it. And so we'll see. I mean, that's what I'm going to be here for the rest of the decade, watching, is to see how this goes. And obviously it would be, it's certainly much more interesting to cover missions and to actually be able to, have flights to the moon. But they're in between, like, let's say they fly in February. The rest of this year is going to be all about, well, not all about. Some of it's going to be about post-flight for Artemis II. Some of it's going to be about getting the next vehicle ready. But the rest of it, most of it, is going to be about, readiness to do a lunar landing. And then certainly next year, the same thing. So, we will sort of immediately shift to Artemis III watch after Artemis II. And that's, I am not encouraged by how secretive things have been I've been doing videos for this channel for 2 years. It's getting more and more secretive. That's not a good sign. So, one of the things I'm going to be curious about is how many questions they will get questions in some of these briefings for Artemis II. Question is, will they entertain those questions, or will they just dismiss them? We will see. And so, yeah, the question being, what do I think is going to happen? It's sort of frustrating to not even really be able to. I mean, I could just take a wild guess, but like I don't really see a whole lot of value in taking a wild guess. I think really the thing to report, everybody's free to do that, but the thing to report really is, we don't know what options they're considering, and we don't know enough information at this point to make a really good guess about which options they might favor, and so that's it's frustrating, but that's the way it is. And so that's I think I've said this a few times, which is, if all we get is secrecy, then that's what I'll be reporting about, which is the secrecy. So, yeah, there's let's see. So yeah, there's some people talking about exploration upper stage, and asking, is there? I did see. I mean, we've seen rumors. So Eric Berger with Ars Technica, he's got really good sources inside the government, inside NASA, and he's talked about this this concept of SLS using replacing the ICPS, which is United Launch Alliance only made 3 of them. NASA or another way of putting it is NASA only bought 3 of them. So that's all there is. And so there's this concept of replacing it with Centaur 5. Anything is feasible. It's really just a question of how much work would that take, and how long would it take? And when you consider, obviously, that was something that was talked about, I think, more before we got into this, the discussion that began at the beginning, not the beginning of last year, but there were rumors about SLS and Orion and all of these Artemis programs being terminated this time last year because of the new administration coming in. And then it turned into, the budget request that was previewed. So we got the official stance from the White House, which was early May, which is terminate everything after Artemis III and begin a commercial procurement of a crewed lunar transport system to go along with the commercial lunar lander systems. And then Congress finally kind of went on the record and said, no, let's, at the very least, let's push that back to after Artemis V, which basically kicks the can out to the beginning of the next decade. For the most part, there are some things that will already, if you want to buy parts, long lead parts, you can't wait until the end of the decade to buy long lead parts for, a downstream vehicle. So there are some decisions, and Jared Isaacman was asked about this on the record in a written question to him after his nomination hearing, but it was a part of the record of the nomination hearing, which is, basically saying, well, Congress doesn't want to have a capability gap again between the shuttle and Dragon. That was more generically shuttle and commercial crew, but it took. They were, I think, when shuttle retired, they were hoping that there would be a replacement commercial crew vehicle by the middle of the decade, so like 2015, and then it turned out to be not to be available for basically the rest of the last decade. So they don't want to do that, but they also don't want to spend the money to guarantee. So here we are. It's like Congress is willing to make some level of commitment, but they aren't willing to guarantee, because if you look at the lunar lander situation, if they had, we spend I shouldn't say we, but the United States spends a lot of money on a lot of things, taxpayer money. Obviously it's priorities, and NASA is not the top priority, but you could argue if this was really a high priority for the government, they could spend more money on it. And so I think this is the level of commitment that the country is willing to accept within all of these different bounds. Too much money and people will complain about that. Too little money and people will complain about that, or maybe just Congress will. So, this is what we have. And really, again, it's because of, this is a very unique situation where you have these two people, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, who are willing to spend government-sized budgets on a space program. And so it's a huge opportunity, and Congress is basically taking advantage of that. So they get the lunar landers, but they don't have to pay for them. I mean, they're paying fixed amount of money. But the problem is now they want it, in 2 years, basically, or maybe 3 years. They don't really have, they don't have the authority to, they didn't negotiate that in the contracts. And so they said, here's, we'll give you this amount of money. You give us a lunar lander that we can rent for our astronauts to fly down to the surface. But, they did not, there is no incentivizing in there for a particular landing date. That's basically just political rhetoric. And so again, this is what we're sort of getting what we asked for, which is, an affordable, it's more sustainable, but it's not going to be, it's not necessarily, there's no guarantee it's going to be ready by the end of 2028. So, and so, sorry, I do tend to go off on a tangent. So exploration upper stage, the status of that is also cloudy. The structural test article, almost all of the pieces are assembled, with the exception of the LH2 tank. And I can, let me see if I can bring up the, I'll put that background image up while I'm pulling that up. The components of the exploration upper stage. But it's not ready, and it does need to go to, it's the structural test article is not ready yet. It does need to go to Marshall Space Flight Center, and then they need to build the flight article structures and then fully outfit that. This is an old graphic of the EUS components, because we don't really have we don't have a lot of there's some really cool graphics I saw at in New Orleans at the Michoud assembly facility. And I asked if those could be provided, but they're apparently the kind of things that you can only see if you're inside the facility. So this is it's close enough, but this is sort of the old design of the exploration upper stage. And really you can, based on the liquid oxygen tank, which used to have a full barrel section, but now has these, I don't even know what, I forget what the terminology they use for it is, but setting that aside, for the structural test article, there won't be engines. They're going to have, I think, a simulated equipment shelf. And I don't think that's necessarily a critical path driver. They're not necessarily going to have all of the main propulsion system equipment, but the liquid oxygen tank that structure is complete. The mid body structure is now complete. So that was an aft adapter barrel that was welded. And then you have a kick ring, and you have these V struts and the mid body basically connects the liquid oxygen tank and the liquid hydrogen tank. Liquid hydrogen tank is the last piece. You can see here, you can see the barrel here, and then this is the aft dome and the forward dome. Those are basically the last. Those are the last two welds that need to be made. Forward adapter is complete. So once they finish welding the LH2 tank, and then they'll have to do, I'm assuming that they're going to do similar things like proof testing it and some thermal protection system applications for it. Then they can assemble all of these pieces. The thrust, I neglected the thrust structure. It's basically a bolted. It's a very simple is not the right way. It's a much simpler structure than some of the other structures, but the thrust structure is also completed. And so once the LH2 tank is outfitted and has all of its whatever thermal protection system it's going to need, then they could assemble the structural test article and ship it to Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville to do that. And then in parallel, they need to start doing they need to start welding the structures for the flight article that'll actually fly on Artemis IV. That has to go to that actually has to be a working spacecraft, as opposed to the structural test article, which is basically it's a passive structure. It is not a working upper stage. So in theory, the structural test article we don't have dates, but in theory, the structural test article would need to go to Marshall probably sometime this year. And if they were really going to stick with a September 2028 date for Artemis IV, they'd need to finish the flight article for the flight article exploration upper stage and do the green run test, which is where what they did with the core stage. You take it to Stennis Space Center, you put it in the stand, you go through a full integrated checkout of the stage, and then you actually tank it and perform a hot fire of the stage and the stand with 4 RL-10 engines. They'd be special sea level engines, sea level nozzles, because the engines are designed to be fired, typically be fired at altitude. But they need to get all of that done by the end of next year. It'd need to be in Florida probably by the beginning of 2028 for them to do all of the testing that they need to do for the Block 1B vehicle. Not just stack it, but they'll go out, they'll do a tanking test for that vehicle for sure. And so if you remember what happened with Artemis I, there were some lessons to be learned during that launch campaign. And so if they were really going to have that vehicle ready to fly, the Artemis IV vehicle, SLS vehicle ready to fly by the end of 2028, they don't really have that much time left to get all of this done. They also will have to finish building the core stage. And you have a very similar situation with the rest of the Artemis IV vehicle. The Artemis IV boosters are pretty much done. They were still doing some final assembly in Utah, but we saw those in the summertime. All of the segments have been cast. Those will be ready whenever NASA needs them. The RS-25 engines are done in storage. They're ready to go. The connectors, there are new connectors for this, but the interstage is another piece of this, but that basically is almost purely a structure. It's 2 barrels and 2 L rings. It'll be a welded structure. I don't know how much moving equipment, working equipment is inside of it. It will probably obviously have instrumentation and wiring feed throughs, but it's not a working element. And then same thing with the universal stage adapter, which is the connector between the upper stage and Orion for the Block 1B vehicle. So really it's going to come down to the 2 stages. So how fast can they finish core stage 4, and how fast can they finish the first flight EUS and finish the green run? And they're, that's the thing. They're same thing in a very generic sense as for Starship and Blue Moon. They don't have very much time. They only have a couple, Boeing's only got a couple of years and maybe a little bit to get all of their work done, just like the HLS providers only have maybe a couple of years. And they'll all need to be ready to fly here in much less than 3 years in order to actually be ready to fly the real mission by the end of 2028. So I saw a question and then I lost it. It was a good question. There are a lot of good questions here. There were okay. There's one more here. I'm just going to adjust the microphone a little bit. Let's see. So let me see if I can kick out. So Johan was asking, is the lunar lander the biggest issue with Artemis III? Probably. The other thing will be the lunar surface spacesuits. I guess, the way things are right now, not necessarily a good idea to count your chickens before they're hatched, proverbially. So that even applies to Artemis II. But we're going to, Artemis II is right here. So we're going to find out about that here pretty soon. But yeah, Lockheed Martin needs to finish the Artemis III Orion. Boeing needs to finish the Artemis III SLS core stage, and then Axiom Space. But I mean, I have gotten the sense that I have gotten is that maybe the spacesuits, it might be tough for not tough. It might be more challenging for the spacesuits to be ready next year, like 2027, but they should be ready. That it isn't expected to be the critical path for 2028. I think if we were still talking about mid 2027 for Artemis III, then maybe that would be more of an issue. So at least the way we understand it right now, and again, we'll see. Like if you had an issue like the heat shield issue with Artemis II, I don't know, we would have to see how long it would take, what the issue would be. And so that's why I say kind of, I'm not, the older I get, the less inclined I am to just assume and count chickens before they're proverbially hatched. But then there was a question about in what direction vertically the SRBs on Artemis II relative to the horizon. Yeah, I guess I'm not totally understanding that question. I mean, they're, relative to the core stage, if you're just talking about the dimensions of the vehicle and the how they're set up, they it flies very similar to the shuttle. I mean, there's the animation. I suppose I could bring that up. Let me see if I can do that and run that while I'm fishing for some of the other questions. Let's see if I can do this. No, that's not what I wanted to do. I need to make sure that this is muted. Apologies. Let's see if I can. I just want to make sure it's muted. If so yeah, let me know if this plays loud or I guess it doesn't play. Well, that's no good. All right, let me see if I can find another way to do this. Well, I think I'll have to skip that for now. The question, there's a question about the lunar reactor, the 2030 lunar reactor. The problem is that this is the old political saw of, the administration proposes, but Congress disposes. So how much leverage, how much can the White House and Jared Isaacman do for a lunar reactor without congressional appropriations? I mean, they can do some level of work, but that's I think the question about a lot of the sustainable lunar base. How much of that has been budgeted by Congress? So not a lot of it. So I don't even know. I don't know that it's even. It wasn't in the. I don't believe it was in the 2026 budget. And that budget, we're just on a continuing resolution for 2026, and we haven't talked about it as much recently because it's sort of baked in with the government shutdown. It's like you're almost back here, but the government has not passed regular appropriations for NASA since I believe fiscal 24. So fiscal 25 was a full year continuing resolution. We're now, a whole quarter into fiscal 26. We're still on a continuing resolution. There's probably a chance that fiscal 26 could even go the entire year on a continuing resolution. And so that would hamstring or that would make it difficult to start new programs like a lunar reactor. So that's sort of to be determined. We have to see what's in the fiscal 2027 budget request, and we don't even know when that's going to be. I think the rumors were, the tradition was for an existing administration to release their budget request in February. the rumors that the last time I checked around for that, it didn't sound like that was going to happen. They were talking about something more like spring, but we'll see. Whenever that comes out, what are they proposing? How much are they proposing? And then what does Congress do? That's, so right now it's not nearly as firm as the stuff that is sort of in the here and now, which is, the Orion SLS, Exploration Ground Systems, Gateway, Human Landing System, the spacesuits. Those aren't, I wouldn't call them bought and paid for, but they're spending on all of those. And so those are all financial commitments that they're making to one degree or another. So I don't know what kind of financial commitment there is yet to that. And so that's definitely something that we'll be looking for, because it has to play in that same sandbox with all of these other programs and priorities. And of course, the White House has different priorities than Congress does. And so that's going to be one of those things, especially if the White House wants that to be, like priority number 2, for instance. So if the White House priorities are commercial lunar, and then lunar base, the Congress's priorities are not that. Congress's priorities, I think, still if you just look at the money anyway, still Orion and SLS, and then Gateway, I think, is in there, and then Human Landing System. You could probably argue Orion and SLS are still the top priority from a spending standpoint, then Lunar Lander, then Gateway. But those are different priorities, and they all require some level of funding. So, So there's a question, and this is interesting. I'll be curious if I can ask somebody from Lockheed Martin during the Artemis II events. But there's a question in here from Yuri: how realistic is commercial Orion? As it seems Lockheed is committed for commercial use of it, more or less. I think it depends on. Technically, it's maybe realistic's not, maybe I would say technically, I think it's completely feasible. It's not like impossible. There's no, I don't think there are any technical showstoppers to putting Orion on another launch vehicle. And, Orion first flew on the Delta IV Heavy, and SLS actually is essentially using the Delta IV upper stage as its in-space second stage, but still it's already flown on 2 launch vehicles, and it could be adapted. NASA took a very sort of a quick and dirty look at it, actually it's more than 5 years ago, on Falcon Heavy. I think it could be made to work on Falcon Heavy. Same thing with Vulcan, and certainly with there's been more talk specifically about New Glenn. It's feasible to make it more launch vehicle agnostic. Could probably fly on Starship in some way, shape, or form. It's more about who's gonna the money. Who's gonna pay to do that? Is it the government? And maybe more specifically, is the government, if the government isn't willing to pay for it, then is it feasible? Is it feasible for, I'm a little more skeptical that Lockheed Martin would be willing to pay for it themselves. And then the question would be, okay, so, and then there's that, again, proverbial skin in the game. How much skin in the game are they willing to contribute, so to speak? How much are they willing to invest of their own money to commercialize, to make either not just commercialize Orion, but to make it a purely commercial program? Because they then they would not only have to spend money to put it on other launch vehicles, and even if that's a one-time charge, but then there's the recurring cost of managing and maintaining the entire program, which right now NASA is completely paying for. So, and I don't know that stopped the idea of a commercial SLS program, but it certainly seems to have frozen it. It's dormant right now. I don't know that it's dead, but it's hard to tell the difference between dormant and dead at this point. But I don't know that anybody is willing to take on the cost of the SLS program, which would be double or more the size of Orion, without some government assistance, if not a significant amount of government assistance. And you could ask the same question about commercial Orion. Are they talking about, again, completely taking over the cost of running that program, or are they talking about some large fraction of that, or what? So it's basically technically feasible. It's, what does the money look like? Because there's the question of that's a lot of money, and right now the only people that we're seeing that are willing to spend that kind of money are the government for some programs, and then Musk and Bezos. But everybody else is getting money from somebody to do that. Certainly, and certainly something of that magnitude. We're talking about probably, at least right now, the Orion budget, I think, it's over $1 billion a year. The cost to actually to integrate it with another vehicle is going to be in that ballpark. You could spread it out over several years, but that's still a huge amount of money. And so who's going to, that's the question. Who's going to pay to integrate it with New Glenn, for example? And then who's going to pay to run the program if it's not the government? So it's technically feasible. It's financially, that's the question. So. So Robert Curtis is asking, will we get better onboard footage of Orion when it does its lunar flyby compared to what we got for Artemis I? That's a big question. The Orion has, let me see if I can bring that up because that's more still pictures. Orion has an optical communication system, and I did get a chance to ask about that system a little bit when I was in Houston. Now those are, I can show this. So these are this is the hardware itself. And this is kind of where it's oriented on the Orion, and you're sort of looking at the, an X-ray version of it. So this is the crew module adapter structure. This is the inner wall, and then this is the down here. They're mounted to the aft walls, and then there's a outboard walls. But let me see if I can find. But the idea is for the system. Let me see if I can find There's a lot of just random Orion stuff in here. The system at least has the capability to support. I don't know if it was, I can't remember if they said 4K high def video, but the system does have that. It has certainly high def capability for video. What the folks in Houston that I got a chance to speak to said was, because the equipment is mounted on the aft wall of the crew module adapter, so it's facing aft for the most part. Let me see if I can find the. It is useful to have the graphic just to get a sense of. But the key. Orion they want to fly Orion in a tail to sun attitude most of the time. And no, that's not it either. Well, this is okay, I guess. Well, this is good enough, I think, to illustrate, so to speak. Since they want to fly Orion in a tail to sun attitude or something, biased in that sense, tail to sun for thermal reasons, if the optical antenna, you're going to get your highest data rates when the antenna is pointed towards Earth, because that's where the receiving stations are. And so if it depends on the relative where the sun, Earth, and moon are. So if the sun is kind of in the same part of the sky as the Earth as viewed from Orion, then you get the best of both worlds. If the sun is on the opposite part of the sky, then it's hard, then the antenna is facing away from Earth, then I can't remember the numbers. Let me see if I can bring them up in my notes. But they talked about there being, they might only get a few hours of high def video downlink capability for the mission. Depending on whether, the extremes being like new moon versus full moon. And I have not looked at the lunar calendar to see where things are. But that would be just that's a what do you call it? A exercise, an educational or exercise that could be done to look at the phases of the moon in early February, where the moon is, where the sun is. But you could have several hours if the sun and the Earth are in the right, relatively speaking, because those are the two extremes, and you could be half moon, and in that case, I don't know how much you get there, but those, I guess, were the extremes, were maybe a couple of hours, because they would have to go out of attitude to downlink, versus if they're just in a good attitude to downlink high def video or high bandwidth data, then you get into then you would have, more of a, better, and so we'll have to see, because then one of the things that happened in Artemis I was, with that tail to sun, priority, the video wasn't great, but it was better, I think, than they expected. And so they did not have this optical communication system on Artemis I, but they did have it. It did seem like they had a little bit better downlink capability. But I mean, we're going to want to see the crew. And then the thing is, during the lunar flyby itself, the spacecraft will be pointed towards the moon so that the crew can do the observations that they're planning on doing. And so that might be, that's another one of those things, is where's the Earth relative to, there will be a period of time where the crew will be LOS, loss of signal. So the Earth will be, the moon will be between them and the Earth. And so that will be a period of time where there won't be any live downlink. They won't get anything from the spacecraft during that period of time. So, but I think definitely there's definitely the hope that they will get, and they're also, I would say, they're going to try. There's going to be more dedicated coverage of this mission than Artemis I. It does seem like they're going to. I don't know that they're going to provide 24/7 coverage. It does. I've gotten the sense maybe that they might do that, which is the way that they used to do it during shuttle. But I don't know for sure at this point. We'll have to see. The one thing that I have heard from Houston is they're going to allow media to cover the mission there. They're planning on doing a daily status briefing from the Space Center. And so I would plan on trying to be there for as many of those as I can. Certainly for the big, the lunar flyby day would be one of the big days for that. But then also just, whatever's going on during the mission. But I don't know if we've gotten that yet. And the thing is, for Artemis I, they did not. It was that mission had the possibility of being as much as 6 weeks long. No crew. So, there were some days during the 25, I think it was 25 days, where there was, a couple of minutes of, like they did what amounts to like a 5-minute video, YouTube video, every day, but there was no live commentary. There was no, they did put up a live stream of whatever they were getting downlinked from Orion, but there was, again, no commentary. We didn't have a sense of what was going on from moment to moment during the mission, like we used to with shuttle missions. And if I recall correctly, for the True Dragon, maybe not for the crewed Dragon test flight, I believe, until they got to the space station, which has its own, live coverage. They covered that during that, during the period of time from launch to rendezvous and docking with the space station. So we'll just have to see kind of what we get in terms of coverage. But I'm planning on trying to do as much coverage as I can during the mission. So. All right. Well, so somebody's asking, will I be at the launch in person? I think I mentioned this in a members video, but the problem with I can't be in two places at once. And for me, the priority would be to cover the mission. And so the problem is it's difficult to cover the mission from the press site in Florida. It's like as soon as the vehicle gets out of town, the mission is in Houston. And so I have to decide whether I want to watch the launch or whether I want to cover the mission. And so I'm absolutely leaning towards covering the mission. And this is basically what I did for the last two space shuttle missions, which was for NASA spaceflight, for NSF NASA spaceflight. I was in Houston at the time of the launch. And so if I was just a spectator and got the chance to watch the launch from that close, then yeah, that's the best place to be a spectator and to just take in the experience. But to be fair, from a media standpoint, there are going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of people who will provide that coverage. And so I kind of view sticking with the mission as being complementary to that. So there's going to be a lot of interest in the show that the vehicle puts on for launch. And so I'll be interested in that, but I'll also be interested in, once the vehicle's on orbit, the first 5 hours of mission. Let me see if I can bring that up. So the NASA published the reference guide for published the SLS reference guide, and that does have a little bit of data for the mission. Let me see if I can find those are just some of the numbers, but then there's a here we go, mission events. Oops. So I mean, this is, the launch, this is the first 2 minutes of the mission. You still want to be in Florida for that, because you still get the experience of the launch. But then once the vehicle's on orbit, so you get to MECO, then the perigee raise maneuver, then the apogee raise burn, and then the proxops demo. That's 3.5 hours possibly after launch. And that the proximity operations demo, which is when they're going to be flying around the ICPS upper stage after they separate from it. That would be, Orion will be close enough. We'll still be in TDRS. I think they'll still be able to downlink through the tracking data and relay satellite system. And so in theory, we should be able to get pretty good live coverage of that. And so, unless you're a VIP, it's very difficult to get from the Kennedy Space Center press site to Houston, even in 3 hours. And so, I'm absolutely leaning towards being in Houston for the first day of the mission, because there's a lot of they don't even have it on here on this page. So after the departure burn down here, so after the proximity operations demo, then Orion is going to do another separation burn to put a lot of distance between it and the ICPS in space second stage. But they're on this high Earth orbit trajectory at that point. They're both going up to this 74,000 kilometer apogee, and those views themselves will be really interesting. It'll be interesting to see how much of that there is. But the crew's also going to go. Let me see if I have that picture. So this is just a graphic showing relative distance of things. But what was interesting is, and again, it does say down here notional. So this is not gospel, so to speak, but this is kind of notional. These it's saying these are the crew sleep periods. And so after this PRB is the perigee raise burn, because let me see if I can go back to the by the numbers thing. So what they talked about for the first crew sleep period, it's actually they actually talk about it being 2 4-hour naps. So the crew will do the first 4-hour nap, and then they'll get up for this perigee raise burn. And so what that is the core stage puts itself in this elliptical. It's 2,200 kilometer apogee, but 30 kilometer perigee. So it'll re-enter. So what they do right after launch is the ICPS will raise the perigee up to 185 kilometers, which is a safe orbit. Then it does the apogee raise burn, and it gives you that 74,000 kilometer apogee, but it actually changes the perigee to 0, which puts both of them on a deorbit trajectory, but the period of that orbit is 24 hours. So when they get up to that 74,000 kilometer apogee, then Orion will do a short burn to once again bring the perigee of that orbit back up to 185 kilometers. And so that's what the crew's going to get up just to monitor, just because, again, this is the first crewed version of the vehicle, of the spacecraft. And so everything they're doing is going to be, this is the crewed demonstration of the vehicle. And so it's very much a crewed test flight. And so, for this, they will, and this is a special trajectory as well. For most Artemis missions, like Artemis I, instead of going into a high Earth orbit, they will just At the end of the first orbit, they will just do the translunar injection burn and go to the moon, not 90 minutes after launch, but, I think maybe an hour, 45 minutes after launch, they do that burn, and 2 hours after liftoff, they're on their way to the moon. In this case, they're doing this risk reduction high Earth orbit, which means that if for whatever reason they couldn't do anything else, Orion Orion would come back to Earth after 24 hours. But that's obviously not the intention, but that's what they're going to be doing. And so that's about 12 hours after liftoff. They're going to be doing this perigee raise burn to set themselves up for not only to stay in orbit, but also to set themselves up for the translunar injection burn, which is again another 12 hours later. So they'll do this little short perigee raise burn to raise the perigee from 0 back up to 185 kilometers, and then they're supposed to go back to sleep and do another 4-hour nap, and then they get up for flight day 2, and then there's several hours before that TLI burn. But all of that is part of the mission, and unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but it's going to be easier to cover all of the post liftoff events from Houston versus from the press site. So that's absolutely what I'm leaning towards. But if for whatever reason, if it becomes problematic to do that the first flight day, then I'm not going to necessarily rule that out. Now, the wet dress rehearsal, the tanking test before launch, I do want to be in Florida for that, and I do want to be in Florida for the rollout. And then I don't know where the crew is supposed to arrive for launch, somewhere in the week before the launch. And so that would be kind of cool to be there for that. And then there's also all of the representatives from the different programs that I would be interested in catching up with. So I do want to be in Florida for a lot of the pre-launch activity leading up to the launch. It's just that ideally there's going to be a point at which I, excuse myself and go to Houston before launch day. So that's at least my tentative plan. But again, because we still have a lot of details that need to be filled in, and so I'll be adjusting that as we get more details about what opportunities there are in terms of mission coverage. Let's see. So okay. So this is somebody the question about the direction, the separation of the boosters. They did change the I think that is in here. They talked about a few of the changes they made from Artemis I to Artemis II for SLS. It's relatively subtle change though. Let me see if I can find it. It's in the reference guide, but there would also be some more details that would be interesting. No. Okay, yeah. Yes. Sort of. But the orientation of the separation motors is still pretty much the same. So but they did rotate them. They did rotate them 15 degrees. I don't know that we know for sure how which direction. I think maybe they want to give them more lateral thrust to get them to push them farther laterally away from the core stage and the rest of the vehicle. So that would be, but that's a guess. but I mean, that would be my guess, is that they, in order to increase the clearances, in order to increase the lateral clearances, that they would cant those. They would cant those to give the boosters more of a lateral component to push them farther away from the sides of the vehicle. Somebody says, "Is my mic is the mic volume too low? Is that, I can, or maybe I need to just adjust it a little bit. Hopefully that's a little better." Somebody's mentioning about barbecue mode. They don't do that. They did that for Apollo, but they don't do that for Orion. Orion basically sits in a tail to sun attitude for the most part, and it, like, they have. I mean, it has a fairly wide deadband, so to speak, of, like, I think they said it was 20 degrees or thereabouts. But so they'll just let the spacecraft sort of stay in that tail to sun attitude, and if it drifts too far away from being centered on the sun, then the attitude control system will kick in. But they don't do barbecue roll. They don't do a barbecue roll for this vehicle, for this spacecraft. The talking about doing environmental control, life support system testing, that's what the first, I think they've done some testing of the different subsystems, and things like the carbon dioxide scrubber. I think they've tested that on the space station, but they don't. I don't think they have. I think they just want to make sure that the systems can handle a range of metabolic loads, so to speak. So one of the tests that they're talking about doing, that they want to see, especially for something like the carbon dioxide systems, is to have the crew exercise, and so they'll there's only enough room in there, I think, for one crew member to exercise at a time, but they want to do at least one exercise period in that 24-hour orbit before and see how the carbon dioxide removal system works. And then obviously all you have the actual equipment itself, and then you have all of the avionics and the software and hardware management of that, and the redundancy, and then the flight control system. When I'm talking about navigation necessarily, but just systems management, the Orion flight software. In addition to all of the crew and ECLSS systems, you also have all of the software. There are more functional modules in the software that also now have to run in parallel with, guidance, navigation, and control. So you're not just managing navigation. You're managing, and not just managing propulsion, propellant management. You're now also managing the life support systems as well. And you have to do that obviously in parallel. So, the CubeSats, that is also in this SLS reference guide. Whoops. there were, I think they talked about 5 of them for a period of time, or they signed agreements for 5 of them, but it looks like 4 of them were able, these were shoestring, these are the relatively shoestring projects. And again, when ICPS separates, it has a very high apogee, but it also has a perigee of 0. And so these CubeSats aren't necessarily going to the moon for free. They're actually only going to get a ride to a 24-hour orbit for free. And then I think, no, that was Argentina. There was a 5th country that I guess wasn't able to make the flight, but these are the 4 that were installed. And so this is and these are the 4 of them. And again, this was one of my questions, and I noticed that they addressed it, which was, over here, what are they going to do? So I think one of them. So yeah, so this first one, the first one is going to be a 24-hour mission, but then the other 3 have their own propulsion system, and they'll raise the perigee to at least for a longer mission anyway. So but that's kind of the time frame and the what they're planning on doing for those. So you can see over here in the 4th column, they're going to be, once ICPS is completely, it says end of mission. I don't know exactly what that means. I think they said they're going to passivate the stage before they even do the ProxOps demo. But then they're going to use the attitude control system. They're going to do, I think they said it was going to be kind of like a blowdown and just vent the attitude control system down, which will adjust the reentry footprint for when the stage enters. I think I have to go back and look, but I think they're going to do that before then. But then there'll basically the stage. One of the last things that the stage will do is it will send a signal to the deployment system, and then the deployment system is basically independent. The avionics unit you can see here, it's independent of the stage, and then it'll have a timer, and it'll start deploying these four secondary payloads. And you can see actually this is somewhat out of sequence, but it'll deploy them at the first one, and then the second one will be 2 minutes after the first, and then the third one will be a minute later, and then the fourth one will be, so the first ones, so you can see that they deploy them relatively quickly at either 2 minute or 1 minute intervals after that, or at least that's the intent anyway. So somebody was asking, okay, so there's a question here about the Strakes, and these are, I'm blanking on his name now. But he got these pictures from NASA. Let me see if I can find those in my notes, because I don't want to. But I'll bring up the pictures. This is the plus Z side. So, oops, I'm going to clear that. But yeah, they're just. I mean, there's some graphics that show the the flow, the flow over these, and it's basically just there's a vibration mode that the stage is a little bit, the stage was not detuned from that they saw during the first launch, and so they added these fins basically on either side of the forward core stage to booster attach points. So this is the plus Z side where the America 250 logos are, and then so this is the side from this point of view, the mobile launcher is behind you, and or not well, would be in the background of this view, and then in the other picture. So now the mobile launcher is behind the point of view of the camera here, and so here you're looking at let's see, do it backwards here. So in this case, the left booster is on the left and the right booster is on the right, but then now on the other side of the vehicle, now the right booster is on the left and the left booster is on the right. Now let's see if I can. That's right. It's a Scott Manley. So I'm apologies. Sorry about that, Scott, because he's way better. He's much better. Much well known, a lot more than I am. But he got I think he went to Ames Research Center where they gave him a briefing on this, and he was able to get these photographs of the Strakes after they were closed out. So the CubeSats, let me see if I can, how they're going to be deployed. So the CubeSats will stay with the upper stage. I just need to find that. I just need to find the picture here. They're not actually with Orion. They're with it's called the Orion stage adapter, and it's actually an SLS. It's actually part of it's an SLS program piece of hardware. Let me see if I can, no. Well, I'll just have to go with this for now. That's all right. So they're installed on the on the inside of the Orion stage adapter, and when Orion separates from SLS from the ICPS, it'll actually separate it'll actually separate here at this plane here. So you have these are, this is the crew module fairing. These panels are the service module fairing, and this is Orion hardware. It's called the spacecraft adapter. that actually will stay bolted to the ICPS. So this is the assembly that will be, no, isn't that wrong? So this stuff here, so the ICPS will still be bolted to the Orion stage adapter and the spacecraft adapter, and the payload dispensers are angled such that they know that that's going to be there. They have to be angled so that they clear the spacecraft adapter when they're deployed. And so yeah, the CubeSats actually are deployed from SLS hardware. So but again, so the Orion stage adapter is SLS hardware, the spacecraft adapter is Orion hardware, but when Orion separates, it leaves those three together. And then again, these are launch pieces here. The launch abort system will be jettisoned about 3 minutes into flight, and then actually the service module fairing panels will be jettisoned a few seconds before that. So but that's where the CubeSats are. Yeah, there's a question about, again, this isn't necessarily a technical question about publicity for Artemis II. I think, public affairs, I don't think public affairs, somebody from public affairs once told me that they have influence over policy decisions, but they don't actually have any authority. So they just, they're basically carrying out policy from above. And so if you think about it, this year, public affairs has been cut. Their head count was cut. So they have less people that can help. They can either, handle media inquiries. So, I remember this from, when I got started working with NSF, NASA spaceflight back, 2010, 2009, 2011. I would hear from people working in the shuttle program and was able to converse with them. They knew my email or they knew me from whatever, this board or that board. But if I actually wanted to officially speak with them and ask them questions, I could not. The protocol is you have to go through public affairs. So you have to go through official channels to talk to anybody about anything. So if I want to ask anybody a question on the record, I have to go through public affairs. Well, so if now you have 2,500 journalists or media members or whatever you want to call them, are trying to ask, everybody's got at least one question. So if you have 2,500 journalists trying to ask a question and you have 50 public affairs people to handle that, and then you cut their department down to 20, or let's say you only cut them down to 40 or 35, there's just less, this is, you hear people say less is more. Not in this case. This is definitely less is less. And so there's just not enough people. It's not the only problem, but that's not making it better. It's making it worse. There's not enough people to deal with media inquiries, to deal with public relations. And you still have to, translate. Like, so my conceit is I can avoid to some extent doing the full translation. So I'm speaking to an audience that I'm assuming that you guys are, relatively well versed technically. So, so I can throw lots of acronyms out there, and for the most part, you guys won't complain too much, thankfully. But so, when you watch NASA TV or whatever they call it now, NASA Plus, or the NASA live streams for the launch, they are talking to the broadest audience, and so they can't assume anybody knows anything. So that has that's and they can only broadcast one, they can only do one broadcast. They can't do a broadcast for, I guess that's what I'm for, and that's what NSF NASA Spaceflight's for, and all of the, Spaceflight Now and Ars Technica. They're the other audiences they have to go somewhere else for that stuff, because it's just a different audience. But I don't know, so there's the policy issues, there's the headcount issues, there's the and then there's there's also the, then you have to decide who are you targeting with that advertisements. And then there's also, again, we also have this, I'm generalizing when I call it secrecy, but there's also there's also a desire not to talk about delays and things like that. And so there's a reluctance of, I would almost call it strange. I just don't know how else to put it. I don't understand the reluctance to talk about a launch date, because at this point, even if they aren't willing to say, well, we're definitely going for February, they are definitely going. There's a huge part of the support teams and the flight crews and everybody who are getting ready for February. So if they don't fly in February, that's a delay. I don't know whether they officially set a date in February or not. There's a lot of people who are going to be, deploying for this. And there's a lot of plans that will be changed inside and outside NASA if they move from February to March, and that's going to get called a delay and whether they talk about it or not. And so I don't understand the reluctance because everybody's delayed. And so I just don't understand. I don't understand why they're doing this, why they can't say, because they can't stop people from, it doesn't mean that the particular narrative is going to become the narrative or take hold, but they don't have any control over the narrative. And I guess I would argue saying nothing is the least effective way of of setting a narrative. If you say nothing, you're ceding control, or you're ceding the narrative's going to come from somebody else if you don't say anything. So yeah, that part of it I don't understand. But they haven't. We've definitely heard that from several people who are like, they just don't get the sense that a sort of general that there's a broad awareness of the fact that people might be going to the moon in 4 weeks. But it also doesn't take as long for people to become aware of that either. So, maybe the day before, I still would expect there will be a decent amount of interest in the launch. But then, to me, probably just as interesting will be the lunar flyby day. And what do we see when the crew, closest approach to the moon? What do we see live? I don't know how important it is if we get high definition imagery relatively quickly, because as I was saying, the spacecraft will pass, the moon will pass in between the spacecraft and Earth for a period of time, but there will be a lot of time where the spacecraft can see Earth and the moon, and they're going to be close to the moon. And so it is something, there will be many hours where Orion and the crew will be close to the moon. And it would be great if that, I think, will be a huge advantage if they can show that live. And if they can't, to be able to do that as quickly as they can. But awareness ahead of time, I mean, the other it's not going to be scheduled in prime time, but then I don't know how much, prime time is a thing for 50-year-olds and older than 50 people like me. Time slots aren't quite the same as they were, but from a United States standpoint, a lot of this mission could be conducted during what would be considered overnight hours. It's certainly possible, since it will be launching at night. a lot of the day will be. We don't know. Again, that would be an interesting thing from a timeline standpoint, is to get a sense of what time of day that would be. But I mean, I'm going to plan on being up for it one way or the other. So. So let's see if I can find that. So the launch periods, generally speaking, the launch periods are going to be the first one that's available, or that they'll be ready for, would be February, or that they could be. I can't say they will, but they could be ready in early February. That's what they're certainly trying to make, early February right now. The next one would be early March. And then the one after that's probably, for the most part, going to be, it's going to be kind of on a monthly basis. The next one after that's going to mostly be probably in early April, but it could be a little bit. There could be a few opportunities in very late March, early April, and then you know again after that you could start seeing, you could start seeing opportunities where it's like late April, early May. That kind of thing. It isn't going to be early every month. Because it's based on the lunar month and not the calendar month. But that would be the next few opportunities are going to be early February, early March, and probably essentially early April. And there's about a week's worth of time in early February. So right now they're talking about February 6th. And we don't know exactly why, because we heard February 5th. They may have a window on February 5th, and they might, I think Eric Berger posted on social media back in late September, he'd heard they had, if I recall correctly, was something like a 40 minute long window on February 5th. It might be a little bit more or a little bit less today, but that's not, considering this is the first launch of a crewed Orion, and you're adding crew to this launch procedure, launch countdown. I think they want the maximum launch window on a given day is 2 hours. And I think they probably want to start with a 2-hour launch window, whatever day that is. And they're willing, even though they don't have that many days, that they're willing to give up at least that would be my interpretation, because they haven't said one way or the other. But if February 5th is a 40-minute window, and February 6th is a 2-hour window, and then February 7th is a 2-hour window, and so on, I can see how they would say, well, we're willing to wait. We're willing to skip to the 6th as the first opportunity. But again, like I said, we're waiting to hear what the sort of strategy is going to be here, assuming that they're going to roll out here in a week and a half to 2 weeks. And so I see some people talking about the public, the public interest and so on. I mean, it's a pet peeve of mine, because I'm seeing the direct engagement between NASA and the media declining. And it's not media, media is expanding and growing. And, it's like there was, the quote unquote traditional media, which was, back when the internet was on paper, so to speak, when I was a kid. But there's now, there was the TV networks, before that there was the newspapers, and then the TV networks, and then the World Wide Web. And then there was Twitter. And, now there's, Twitch and YouTube and streaming, there's more media and less engagement from, directly from NASA to the media. That's a pet peeve of mine. And so that was the other thing. That's why I wanted to start asking these questions in 2023. Because now there's, I've been able to talk to a handful of people a few times, but, there's not enough time now. There's just not enough time to get enough opportunities to be fully up to speed on this. And so yeah, to me, I think that's a lost opportunity. But I don't know what NASA's priorities are in terms of public engagement. I mean, you could ask the question if it's a priority for them. I don't think that they're trying to, there's a difference between hiding things and, not and having low engagement. So I don't think they're trying to hide things, but there are laws. But it's the same thing as quote unquote infrastructure. They're not spending money on infrastructure. And if you want to call communications and public engagement part of that, they're not spending money on that either. Obviously this equipment, like this vehicle that's in the back, behind me here on this screen, that's very expensive, and the ground equipment and the people to make it work it's expensive to keep everybody paid. But there's just not, there's just not as much engagement between either NASA and the public or NASA and the media. And but again, I'm sure that's, everybody can argue how exactly they would do that. So but that was my point, was we had, Artemis I is 3 years ago now. We could have used, and even if we just start, the crew was named in, what was it, April of 2023. If you just started then, it's not quite 3 years, but that's a lot of time to go over, to cover, a lot of ground. I would have been willing certainly to spend a lot more of that time, directly engaged with the people who are involved in making this mission happen, and a bunch of other things. There was plenty of time to do that, and we did not get the opportunity to do that. We got, or very few opportunities to do that, and that's a pet peeve of mine. Well, so yeah, there's a quick question about the Super Bowl. I think the Super Bowl is February 8th, I think. It's obviously on a Sunday. So it'd be Sunday night. Yes, so February 8th. It obviously depends on when they launch. So if they were to launch on the 6th, then on the night of the 6th, or the evening of the 6th, or when exactly it is, but it is supposed to be at night, then in theory they would be on their way to the moon even when the pregame starts, many hours before kickoff. But it's also possible that something keeps them on the ground, and it's possible. I'm not sure what I've seen some rumored launch windows, but they're just totally unconfirmed. So I don't even know if they're real, or they're accurate. So other than night, but in theory, I think kickoff for the Super Bowls is around, 6:30-ish Eastern is sort of become the regular time for Super Bowl kickoff on Sunday night. That probably isn't totally nighttime. It is, or it isn't, but if they were to do a launch attempt, they could, in theory, be trying. They could be in a countdown on the night of the Super Bowl as it happens. In which case, they won't be in flight yet. So, yeah, that's a possibility. It's a possibility that they're on their way. They're already on their way to the moon. It's a possibility that they haven't started yet. So. All right, let me see if I can do so. There's Yuri's asking about gateway hardware. So I did a video about the power and propulsion element, the PPE. It is basically it is in integrated testing. I think they have. I have not followed up on the solar arrays, but they have all of the solar electric thrusters are on hand at the integration site, spacecraft bus, and all of the equipment, things like the equipment shelves, all of the propellant tanks, the propulsion systems, the avionics, flight computers, and so on. They've started testing on that. They're going to begin. They started ambient testing at the end of the summer, beginning of fall. Then they're going to go into environmental testing, so like thermal vacuum testing. So they're getting ready to. So the spacecraft is mostly assembled. They're doing integrated testing. They'll install all the remaining elements pretty soon, during this year, I would assume. The solar arrays were supposed to be delivered by the end of 2025, the end of the fourth quarter. We'll see. That is something I'll try and check up on, and or maybe we'll hear from Lanteris, formerly Maxar, about that pretty soon, or maybe Retwire, the sub for that, the subcontractor for that, will announce something. I might have missed that on the PR Newswire, for instance. But that spacecraft's in testing. We don't know about the habitation and logistics outpost module. That's in Arizona. It's supposed to be in outfitting. The structure arrived there in April. We haven't heard anything about it since then. The IHAB module, we just haven't gotten I don't think we've gotten an update on that. That's supposed to fly on Artemis IV. I don't know that I can't remember if they've reached critical design review. They have done some fabrication of some structural elements, but I don't know if they've finished welding those, for instance. And again, I don't know whether they've gotten through CDR, a critical design review, for that yet. So we don't know a lot. And then I mentioned in the quarterly review video that I released recently, we don't really know the status of the Gateway Logistics program at this point, which was the Dragon XL, the SpaceX spacecraft that SpaceX was contracted for. We haven't heard anything about that for a couple of years, other than that they started that project. They got the authority to proceed for that. Haven't heard anything about that in 2 years. But we did hear about Gateway recently. I'm still trying to get something to set up an interview with the Gateway, with somebody within NASA, on the NASA side of the Gateway program. They have politely declined since the program was put on the chopping block back in May. So part of the reason, but not the only reason, they were shy before the White House proposed terminating the program, but that obviously made them even more shy. And so I don't know where that's going now. I lost my display. Hang on a sec here, folks. I know we're getting pretty close here to. We've been doing this for a while here, so I should probably wrap up. I will do more of these once we have some live content. It'll be for Artemis 1. They had a live stream up for the vehicle when it was out at the pad. That would be a natural thing to do, some Q&A. And we could do obviously more focused Q&A on Artemis 2 as we get closer to a launch. But yeah, then that's the other thing is, like, again, I've been doing just recorded videos for the most part every week for the last 2 years, just because there hasn't been a mission. But as we get closer to this one, it's going to make sense to do. It's going to be harder to do a lot of pre-production on stuff. It's going to be easier to just come out and say, here's what I'm hearing. What are your, what have you got? What questions have you got? So I'm planning on doing more of these, just because it's going to be easier to do. It's easier to get set up for them, and it's easier to just to execute these. So we'll do more of these, and obviously they won't necessarily be on a set time schedule. I'll try and provide as much morning as I can. And then there's also, I don't know what broadband options are going to be available at the space centers. And so if I'm going to have to figure out how much live streaming I can do during the mission, and even like for the rollout in a couple of weeks, whether I'll be able to live stream. If not, I'll try and compensate for that as much as possible, and maybe just do shorter recordings to record content and then post it on the channel. So we'll just have to see how it goes with broadband options in hotels and space centers and things like that. So let me see if I can find another question. Somebody asked about Gateway, and somebody said, do you think Artemis IV is going to fly with the current architecture? At this point, I would say yes, just because Congress has mandated it. And I think there's a couple three reasons. First, Congress mandated it. Those were the provisions and the money in the big beautiful bill that was signed into law in July 4th. Second, you can't. I mean, you can, but it will be harder to justify the existence of SLS for sure, maybe Orion as well, when there is a fully crew-rated operational replacement. So when Starship's flying people, or maybe a better way to put it is, once Starship has demonstrated flying people, launching them from Starbase or Kennedy Space Center or Cape Canaveral, because now they have pads there too. But once they've demonstrated launching them from Earth, and then taking them all the way to the moon, landing on the moon or orbiting the moon, and then bring them all the way back, catch them in a catch tower in Texas or in Florida. Once they've demonstrated that, then that's a full crew-rated operational replacement for, it's not just SLS and Orion, but because Starship is this hybrid thing. But you could say the same thing about New Glenn and Blue Moon. So either New Glenn with Orion or the Blue Moon system with a crew transport spacecraft. But neither of those, the question is, will either of those be ready? If Artemis IV is supposed to fly by the end of 2028, there's some questions about that, but will either Blue Origin or SpaceX, or you could say either the other way around, will SpaceX or Blue Origin be flying crews to the moon by the end of the decade, for instance? If they can, then that certainly opens up the possibility, depending on where Artemis IV is, maybe to reevaluate. But if not, then the government has paid all of this money, and I think Jared Isaacman kind of alluded to this to some extent, saying we've paid hundreds of billions of dollars for this capability. We should use it as long as as long as the replacements aren't ready yet. And so that's, really going to be the question for any of these Artemis missions is when is a commercial replacement flying and has demonstrated crew capabilities all the way to the moon and back. And once they do that, it's going to be it's going to be harder for the government to continue to make the argument to continue paying for a full ride program like this. But those questions are one and the same. It isn't just replacing them. It isn't just when to pull the plug when you have a replacement ready. It's when is the replacement ready? And so if Starship and Blue Moon aren't even landing landers on the moon by the end of 2028, I would assume that they're not going to be ready to fly crew until sometime after that. So that's kind of where we are. And it really, in some respects, it's not even a question of Artemis IV or Artemis V. It's when. If those happen to be ready before Artemis IV, I think that's unlikely. But let's say they were ready before Artemis V, you might open that discussion up again. But if they're not ready until Artemis VII or Artemis VIII, I could also see Orion and SLS getting extended until the commercial capabilities are online. So that's kind of where we are in general. And it, unfortunately, because we know next to nothing about the status of development of these programs, we know more about Starship because it flies flight tests, and we can see demonstrated. They're demonstrating capabilities. They're demonstrating technology. But we haven't seen as much of the Blue Moon stuff. Now, the first Mark 1 landers assembled, so we could see that here this year. We could see that launched by New Glenn this year, so that will finally give us something a little bit more of an idea. But they're not telling us what their schedules and what their milestones are and when those will happen, and so it's hard to tell. I wish we had more information to go on, or I wish that NASA felt like they could talk about this in public. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some level of non-disclosure, a kind of non-disclosure agreement between NASA and the commercial providers. So it's up to the commercial providers to talk, and they don't talk. So that's one of the things that about this that's going on. So it isn't going to affect when they're ready, whether they talk or not, because when they're ready, we will know. We will probably know way before they're ready. But right now it's hard to tell. So that's kind of where things are big picture for Artemis, in terms of, lunar missions and lunar transportation for crews. So trying to think, let me see if there's anything else. Otherwise, it's probably a good time to, because like I said, we'll I'll do another one of these soon. Hopefully before the rollout. I mean, I'm doing live streams for the members, but I'll want to try and do more public live streams as we get closer to launch. So, and then obviously I assume those will be more specifically about Artemis II, but there are these big picture questions about Artemis are a big deal. So. I did see it go by. I apologize. I did see the question from Anthony about what do you think about Bolay and whether that'll come online. That's gonna be tough, because again, I think the White House is definitely more supportive of the commercial, and I don't think they want. I do not get the sense that they want to that they're trying to develop the SLS and Orion further, and so that if that was going to be accelerated, that would have to be something from Congress, or maybe a better way of putting it is Congress will have to provide that money. I think the White House is like, okay, but they would rather the next dollar, more of the next dollar goes to commercial and investing in commercial sustainability, so to speak, than in the government programs. But I think it's going to be a question of, first they have to get exploration upper stage flying as well. So like they have to get that flying first. And when do they get that flying? So when is Artemis IV? That's a big question. Just like same for Artemis III, maybe not as prominent, but that's a big question too. Is like not just when is Artemis III and what you're going to do on it, and the same thing for Artemis IV. When's that realistic, and what are is that going to be a gateway mission and a lunar landing, or is it going to be one or the other? We'll have to see. So I think. All right. Well, so there will be time. Hopefully there will be time. And again, if you feel free to post more questions in the comments, or and I'll try and figure out. Again, I think my top priority for this coming week is to find out when rollout is, because I'm out here in the Los Angeles area, and I'll need to be in the on the Space Coast for rollout. And if that was really next week, then I've got some hustling to do in terms of travel arrangements. And so, yes, I will be that's that I need to get that a little bit more settled. But I mean, this is kind of where we are right now. So, today's the 4th, and we could be looking at rollout. Maybe, Anthony was saying maybe out here, end of this week, or maybe early, somewhere, again, kind of in that area that I've highlighted. Probably not the 11th necessarily. Bethany Stevens did say less than 2 weeks, but she didn't say a little more than 1 week. So there's that. But that's what that's the next thing we're looking for really is, when's the rollout, or, when are they planning on the rollout? Obviously would want to hear status. So for instance, they would need to be getting pretty close to the flight termination system test, because they have to finish that first, and then there's some work that they need to do to get that done. When are they going to roll out? When's the wet dress rehearsal tanking test going to occur? We'd heard, the last I'd heard, which is many months ago, was it was going to be at the end of the pad flow. But there's maybe some, listening to some of the ways that they've talked about doing the tests, and if there are any issues, we can roll back, that kind of stuff. It almost makes me wonder if that's been reevaluated. So I want to know when the rollout is. What are they thinking in terms of the wet dress rehearsal tanking test? And then obviously what the first launch, what is February 6th, are they still looking at February 6th? Those are kind of the next big questions. But then also, again, we also want to get the calendar, so we know which of these specific days in here, which of these days they have actual launch opportunities. And, same thing for Artemis I, they may say, the window opens on the 5th and it closes on the 18th, but then there will be days within that window where there may be, they call them cutouts, where you might have a period where Orion would be in eclipse for too long. The maximum they can be in eclipse is for, I think, 90 minutes. And so there might be a day or two in this launch period, or in launch periods in general, that they can't launch on that day because of one of those constraints. So that's what the calendar is for, is I want to know, just like everybody else, we want to know which days they have launch opportunities. What's the first day? What's the last day? What are the cutouts? And then obviously, right behind that, what are the specific launch windows? What time does the launch window open? What's the duration of the window? And then obviously that tells you when it closes. So we're basically standing here, so to speak, waiting to get that information, and hopefully we'll get it here. Hopefully we'll get it here in the next, certainly by the end of this coming week. So, we'll but that's one. And once I know that, then I'll be able to sort of hopefully be able to figure out my travel arrangements, and then that'll determine where I'm going to be and when I'm going to be in an airport all day. And when I can do more videos and do more live streaming. So, but for now, again, thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in, and like and subscribe, and I will see you again. Soon I'll put a post out about kind of what's coming next. I'm going to try and do a video. If I can do sort of a conventional video this time next week, I will do that. But, thanks for your time. Thanks for the questions. For members, thanks for being a member. That's really helping in terms of, flying on short notice is not cheap. And so I really appreciate the help that folks, again, I saw people contributing in the live, in the chat and the live stream. I really appreciate all the help that you guys are giving me for this. And let's, hopefully we're going to find out here in the next couple 3 days, maybe, or thereabouts, about February, about rollout, and what's happening in the next month for Artemis II. So again, thanks again for your time. Thanks for your questions, and we will do this again, and I will see you next time.